Helen Marie, your host of the I Don't Think We Talk Enough About podcast. Today, I'm joined by the incredible psychotherapist Tasha Bailey. Some of you may know her as the Real Talk therapist on Instagram. In this conversation, we are getting real about boundaries, why they are so hard to set, why they are imperative for our mental health, why they matter for our relationships, and how they can be set with kindness. We are also answering your questions on boundaries that many have sent to me on my Instagram stories this week. In this episode, Tasha brings her beautiful wisdom and brilliant boundary setting protocol to help you find setting boundaries a little easier. It's one I think you're going to love, especially if you feel that you fall into people-pleasing behaviours with certain people. Tasha is a psychotherapist, author and content creator who specialises in mental health. Her first published book, Real Talk, Therapy Lessons in Healing and Self-Love, was released in September last year, and it's one you need to get your hands on. I adored this conversation with Tasha, and I have a feeling that you will too. Welcome, Tasha.
Hi.
Oh, look at that beautiful laugh and smile. It's so lovely to finally meet you.
So good to meet you in person as well. Like, we've been kind of in each other's aura online, but not actually met.
I know. And do you know the first time I came across you was you were, I think this is correct, Instagram's mental health therapist for the day. Was that right?
Oh, yeah.
You did something with it.
Gosh.
That was huge. That's when I didn't know about you before that. And you, what an impact and what an introduction. Tell me.
Yeah, that was like, what was that, 2 years ago? And Meta contacted me and said it's Mental Health Awareness Month and we'd love for you to be our therapist for the day. And I got to control Instagram's Instagram page for the day, which was just really bizarre and wild and amazing. That was 2 years ago. And I think, yeah, it's been such a journey of just being a therapist in the online space. It's just such an interesting journey. It's not what I expected. It's not what I didn't plan to be here in any way. I actually was really happy with just being a therapist and worked a lot with young people in quite deprived areas. And when you work in that kind of setting, you often only have like 12 or 24 sessions with a young person who's got loads of trauma. And you're just like, what can I even do in like 3 to 6 months with this person? Like, how do I help them open up without them feeling completely unraveled by the time that we finish? And so I had this random idea of like, do you know, therapy is really expensive, but social media is like free for everybody. And like, what would happen if I just share a little bit of like therapeutic knowledge online, like a little bit of attachment, a little bit about boundaries, a little bit about, you know, what is trauma and how do you heal from it? And maybe I'll get like 100 followers and that means I've helped 100 people. That'd be amazing. And then obviously I tried that out and it blew up really quickly into our whole community across the world. So yeah, I didn't expect to be here with a book, with a huge platform at all. It was just something I was trying out.
Oh, Tasha, that's what a lovely story as well. And you help so many people. And as you say, you didn't plan that. And then you're right, because therapy sadly isn't accessible to everyone. But what you're doing in your, if you don't mind me saying, bite-sized content, which is really what social media is about, what you're doing is actually giving people some information for them to start to get a little bit curious, to start feeling perhaps less alone in their mental health. And your community, you really pull people together, don't you? I really see that. And your book, Real Talk, Lessons from Therapy on Healing and Self-Love, is absolutely dreamy as a companion to mental health work. When did the book come out, Tasha?
So it came out in September 2023, so less than a year ago. And yeah, it's very, my whole hope was for it to be something that someone could use either whilst they're in therapy or whilst they're waiting for therapy, or if they want to dip their toes in like the healing and self-love journey, don't know where to start. So it kind of breaks down a lot of the things that you'd unpack in therapy, like childhood and even things like sex and boundaries and culture, and like unpacking all those layers of yourself in quite kind of creative but kind of compassionate exercises as well. I want it to be very real talk, so very kind of I guess, kind of casual and like conversational. It's almost like I'm a therapist, but I'm also your friend. I'm your therapist friend, and I'm talking you through some of the things that you can start to unpack so that you can grow closer towards self-love and towards healing.
That really came across when I was reading it. And you feel very much like a friend. It feels like someone's holding your hand as you dip your toe in. And I also felt it was very relatable. You're very honest. It demystified therapy and who a therapist was and brought them down to a much more relatable level. And there's actually a part, before we dive in, this session is all about boundaries. And I feel that's something we don't talk enough about, podcast name, about boundaries and how difficult they are to set, and actually how we can set them with more confidence. And you've devoted an entire chapter to that, which I will come to. But I hope you don't mind. I'd like to read out a little bit from your opening chapter or your introduction, which really touched me. And I think it's really important for people to hold an awareness of this through their self-work journey. You open the book and you're sat with your therapist, because therapists have therapy too, don't they? And I love the way you brought that in. And you said, I can't wait for all of this healing crap to be over. You were 3 years into your training as a psychotherapist. And on this day, you said, I was on the couch with my own therapist. Therapists have therapists, and in desperate need of some hope and reassurance. You leaned back, resting the back of your head on the sofa, and you wanted to visualise the never-ending glow-up I'd eventually have after hundreds of therapy sessions. It's a lot of work, isn't it? It's a lot of personal work of that mirror being held up, isn't it? I've been there. Yeah. It's deep work. But there was a pause. And when my therapist finally responded, her voice was gentle, but the truth of her words shattered me. Tasha, you do realise that the healing doesn't stop? I've gone cold. It's an ongoing journey for all of us. This healing crap is lifelong. I won't read any more, but that made goosebumps. I've got goosebumps because we aren't quick fixes, are we?
Yeah, we're not.
And parts of self-work are really difficult and complex. We've got histories, years of behaviour, adaptive techniques, characteristics that are born from so long ago. We can't undo that with 6 sessions, which again leads to your work with the 12, 24 sessions. Sometimes that's just not enough.
Yeah. And often, like, I'll get new clients and they'll say, like, how long is this going to take? And it's like, well, if you think about all of the relationships that you've had in your life that have been toxic and traumatic, and all the experiences you've had in your life that have been traumatic and unhealthy, like, how long would you say it would take for us to, like, really unpack all of that and reframe all of that and resource you with something different? Because that's definitely not going to be 6 sessions.
No, I know.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a starting point. And I hope that doesn't put people off that are listening. I hope that doesn't give them a fear that, I'm never going to get there. There's still huge benefit from a few sessions.
Yeah.
I know there's a big thing out at the moment around the single session therapy. I think in terms of signposting, great. But I think our social media perhaps does the signposting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see it as like, I think I described somewhere in the book that it's almost like a spiral staircase that you can go around and unpack, your story, unpack your history, unpack, some of the wounds that you've got. And then you'll do it again, but from a higher level, and then again from a higher level. And from each point, you're kind of getting higher and higher into your healing and your awareness of yourself. And so you might dip in and out of therapy throughout your life. You might, I sometimes go into therapy every couple of years, but with somebody different, just to kind of see where I am now, who I am now, and what is my understanding of the person that I've become and I'm becoming, and what's, my past and stuff. So you know, healing is lifelong, but it doesn't have to be a life sentence in that way or life suffering. It is a beautiful and exciting journey if you let it be.
I love that. What a beautiful thing to say to people, to welcome them in. Thank you for sharing that. Should we get stuck into boundaries?
Yes, let's.
We will come to it, but I always open up the podcast to my Instagram community, who I just adore. They really have become like this huge family for me in community. I adore them, and I always open up space for them to ask me questions as well. In my DMs, flooded in response to the question around boundaries. People are finding it really difficult, and they're not really understanding why they're so difficult, and there's a big block to how they can actually set them. But I thought it would be really useful, I will stop moving my hands, it would be really useful to really kind of unpack a little bit around boundaries with you. You devoted an entire chapter to boundaries. It's brilliant. And there's so many bits that really stood out to me.
And it's so funny because originally boundaries wasn't going to be in my book at all. So I actually wrote my whole manuscript, gave it into the deadline, was absolutely exhausted. And then I was like, there's something missing, there's something missing, there's something missing. Boundaries, is it in there? Why is boundaries not in there? It would actually tie in everything together, and it's so needed. So then I literally wrote it within like 24 hours, handed it in, and I was like, okay, now I can rest. And actually it's now my favourite chapter, and a lot of people have emailed me and messaged me saying, oh my God, I've changed my life from just reading that chapter alone. So I'm so happy that I had that like feeling of like something's missing, and kind of put in the energy to put that in because it felt very needed.
Gosh, I'm so pleased you did. But it's such a helpful chapter, isn't it? And it's something people really struggle with. It ties everything together in a way. It's like, as you say, it's that missing piece, tied it all together. You start that chapter with such a concept that I'd never considered before as a therapist. You talk about children learning no as one of their very first words. Yet it's the very word we struggle with as adults. Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah.
And I just wondered, particularly from your background of childhood and adolescent psychotherapy, what causes that forming of identity and separating from this younger core self? That sounds like a very deep question, but what are the things at play that stop us being able to use that brilliant boundaried word?
I would say, like, first we have to understand why we say no at that age, which is that, you know, the first kind of year or so of our life, we are kind of entwined with our parents, it's particularly our mother usually. We're entwined because we need to have our needs met. We need milk, we need to be, you know, our bottoms wiped and all that stuff. Like, so we are very dependent on our parents to look after us, so we're entwined to them. But eventually there's like a little bit of an independence that happens, which is that maybe parents start to go back to work, we start to go to nursery. And so we start to realise that actually I'm not entwined to mum and dad, I'm actually my own human being, which means that when my mum and dad ask me something, I can say no. And that's fun. And saying no is actually super fun for a 2-year-old. If you ever see them, it's like no to everything. And that's their way of saying, I'm independent, I can choose whatever I want to do, I can choose me. And, you know, it's kind of this kind of defiance, and it's fun. But somewhere down the line, when we're a child or maybe into adulthood, we learn that saying no upsets other people, or it makes them think differently about us, or that actually we shouldn't prioritise what we want or what we need. We should prioritise other people. And then it becomes very difficult for us to then say no, or even to listen to what our needs are.
And then there comes in the relationship with others, doesn't it? But I think it's a really interesting concept about we learn it. And sometimes I think there's a lot to be said about being a little bit more childlike, isn't there? Yeah. In that instance, you know, you say you see yourself as independent. We lose a lot of that independence through wanting to fit in, wanting to belong, not knowing how... You talk about sense of self a lot, and I think that's so important in that chapter. We lose our sense of self. And then there comes the elements of people pleasing, doesn't it? Yeah. I'm jumping ahead. Yeah. I really think it would be useful. Yeah. And I absolutely adore your definition of how you would define a boundary, and you talk beautifully about it being a bubble. I use the bubble technique in another way in therapy, but please share, because I know the listeners will love this.
Remember.
Oh,
yeah,
sorry. Do you want to?
No,
sure.
It's good. So I have a bubble, you have a bubble. In my bubble, it has everything that makes me feel safe and comfortable and makes me feel good. So my capacity is in my bubble, and the things that make me feel most like me are in my bubble. So, for example, I like hugs, but I don't like being hugged for too long, because that will make me feel a bit unsafe, if that makes sense. So that's my bubble. I have my own kind of list of different things that make me feel good. And then you'll have your bubble, and you'll have your own list of things that make you feel good, but it'll be different from my list because we're two completely different individuals. And a boundary is when two bubbles come together and they meet. So right now, I mean, we're still quite new to each other, so we're still working out our boundaries. But if we went kind of like, if we moved in together, for example, our boundaries would probably rub together a lot, because you'd have your things that you need to feel safe, and I'd have my things that need to be safe, and they'd be completely different things.
Of course.
I don't do washing up in the evenings, but you might be someone that's like, no, it has to be done before I go to bed.
I do.
So that would be us. That would be a boundary that's being kind of, there's a bit of friction there that we have to kind of create a boundary that makes both of us happy and both of us safe.
Okay.
So that's kind of how I describe a boundary. It's that meeting point between two people and ensuring that both of their needs are being met and looked after in the most tender way.
It's a beautiful description, and I could really visualise that, the bubbles coming together. And you really take notice there of everyone's different lived experience. The example that I just loved in that chapter, and two people in the room here will really get this and understand me a little bit more, was around taking shoes off in your house.
Yeah.
Tasha, I'm with you. That is such a bugbear of mine. I found it really hard to set with some people. But actually, you define it so beautifully. And I wonder if you could just share the example.
Yeah, I think I was kind of saying how, our homes is kind of one way that our boundaries often get expressed.
Yeah.
We all have different rules about our homes and our houses and our personal space. I personally don't like it if people come into my home with their shoes on, because I don't know where their shoes have been. And, I'm renting, so I have a carpet that's not mine. It needs to be clean before I leave this flat. So I like people to take off their shoes at this, as they come into my house at the door. And then if they want socks, I can give them socks if they want to, but they can't come in with shoes. And the example I gave is of a friend coming in without checking if they can come in with their shoes, and they walk in with their shoes and they're sitting down and they're doing, their shoes are everywhere basically. And for me, that's like, oh my gosh, like, I do not feel safe. This is not comfortable. It's not comfortable.
Don't feel comfortable.
My boundaries been broken.
And then you can't be present in that moment because your mind is thinking, I'm really uncomfortable with you sat there with your shoes and I don't know where they've been.
Exactly.
I know.
And the idea is that this is my home, and it's someone's coming into with any boundary, someone's coming into your home and into your space. So a boundary is telling them how they can respect that space and respect your space. So in the book, I kind of describe how you can communicate to somebody with boundaries, with that example. And the idea is to be kind, to be clear, to be specific, and to be supportive. So to do those 4 things, it would be like, I'm so glad that you came over. I'm really glad that you came over. However, I noticed that you walked in with your shoes, and I'd prefer if you leave your shoes at the door, but let me know if you want some socks, so that you're comfortable as well. So I've said something kind, thank you for coming. Yeah. I've said something that is clear. I don't like, shoes in my home. I said something specific, you can leave them at the door. And then I said something supportive, which is, do you want some socks that I can give to you? And you can use that structure with any boundary setting. It could be, someone who body shames you. It could be someone who your boss is always telling you to, work overtime and work on the weekends. You can use it in any situation to just be clear, to be kind, to be clear, specific, and supportive.
And that's a lovely step approach, isn't it? But what I also liked when you were describing that in the book, you talked about that people don't mind as much as you think they're going to. That we can have, and I suppose that's around sense of self, isn't it? We can build up this idea that someone's going to really push that boundary. Of course, people will. What would you say in the situation when someone does react to a boundary you've set that's kind of the bubble's been pushed, hasn't it? It's been popped.
Yeah. The thing is that the people who react badly to your own boundaries, it's often because they can't use you or control you the way that they could before.
Okay.
So someone that comes into my home and says, no, I'm keeping my shoes on, they're my shoes. That's them controlling my space that I rent and I pay for, my space that I've invited them into. Yeah. And that's actually a sign of disrespect. So it's not that my boundary is wrong. It's that they don't know how to respect my boundary. So it's not actually a me problem. It's about them and the relationship.
The Embody Lab is an online resource for embodied education, self-discovery and healing, founded by Dr. Scott Lyons, a renowned author and expert in holistic psychology and mind-body medicine. The Embody Lab is committed to making somatics and trauma healing accessible to everyone by offering virtual events, summits and certificates. The Embody Lab empowers individuals to embark on their own journey of personal growth and transformation through a diverse digital catalogue of programs and resources. Explore exclusive teachings from world-renowned experts like Gabor Mate, Bessel van der Kolk, Peter Levine, Diane Paul Heller and more. Join the Embody Lab community to deepen your healing path. I'm a huge fan of the Embody Lab, and just for you, I have a special code which gives you 10% off all of their courses, and that's Helen 6788. The Embody Lab truly is a wonderful resource for your healing journey. Thank you for clarifying that. And I suppose when you talk about respect, it's about us also having an awareness of respect for someone else's boundary, isn't it? So how we show up with our own boundaries, having that same awareness around other people's boundaries as well. I think that's really important, isn't it? It's reciprocal.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I say is like, you know, when you're having this conversation where you're naming your boundary, make it an invitation for them to talk about theirs as well. Yeah. So you can say, this is my boundary. Is there anything that I should know about you that I can respect for your boundaries? You know, let's make it collaborative. It's not just about me and my needs, it's about both of our needs and how they can both be met at the same time.
And the transparency of that opening up communication, that opening up. And I think it would be very strange for someone, unless it's a them problem, but very strange for someone if you say, I feel really uncomfortable with you having, say, your shoes on in the house. That's an unfair reaction to someone, isn't it? To push above that and continue to make them feel uncomfortable. Thank you for that. I love the way you brought that example in. The other thing I'd like to talk about, and I'd talk about it in Choose You as well, not just to drop my book in, but do it. It's new. My baby's new. Yes. And was around there's different types of boundaries, aren't there? Mm-hmm. Do you want to just explain those a little bit more?
Yeah, so you've got kind of physical boundaries, you've got relationship boundaries, emotional boundaries. You've also got time boundaries, material boundaries, and sexual boundaries.
God, that's easy.
So there's loads.
And self-boundaries.
And self-boundaries too, yes.
Is that, or does that covered
Yeah,
within that?
I think you could... I don't think I speak about self-boundaries, but you could definitely put that as a separate one for sure. But yeah, there's so many, and I find that you might be really boundaried in one area. So you might have really good, physical boundaries. You might have really good, material boundaries where maybe you don't lend money to people, or if you lend money, you kind of have a deadline, all this stuff. But then you might have a poorer or unhealthy boundaries in other areas. So for example, sex is one thing that often comes up, I find with people, is that because of the society that we live in, where we don't get the most sex positive sexual education as children, it means that a lot of people then have kind of quite unhealthy boundaries around sex or ideas around sex. And so it can that could be one area that often people struggle with. But yeah, we can have really healthy boundaries in one area and then unhealthy in other areas that we might need to work on.
That's interesting, isn't it? You say about we could have good boundaries somewhere, healthy boundaries and unhealthy boundaries, but bringing awareness to that as well. and just being that deep. And your book does allow people to get very deeply self-reflective, asking those questions to themselves about really understanding the way they are. And I love the order of your chapters, because you really delve into the core, the coming through, and how to be as an adult. Takes honesty, doesn't it, with self? Takes deep honesty with self.
Yeah, it really does.
You talk about spiky boundaries and wobbly boundaries. How brilliant to understand that there's different sorts of boundaries and where the problems may lie. Do you want to just share what you mean by that?
Yeah, I'll start with wobbly boundaries because I feel like that's what we tend to talk about the most, it kind of out there in the world, which is like when people don't have very healthy boundaries, which is wobbly boundaries are kind of when your boundaries can kind of move for other people. So you find it really difficult to say no.
Okay.
You find it really difficult to prioritize yourself and your needs. Maybe you'll set a boundary and someone will very easily talk you out of it. And you're like, okay, cool. You kind of let guilt feed into your decision of whether to stay with a boundary or not. And it does mean that you probably tend to people please and burn out and just be exhausted with everybody else's needs because then there's no space for you to look after your own. So that's what I call wobbly boundaries. You're consumed with what everybody else needs and never really make space or time for your own needs.
Can I just interject there and say, because it was a question I wanted to ask a bit further along in the podcast around, and you said it so succinctly there, was around the mental health implications of wobbly boundaries.
Yeah.
So what you're seeing is burnout, overwhelm, stress, people pleasing.
Yeah.
You know, that lack of sense of self.
Yeah. And even like, high anxiety. And I think sometimes I think about, fight and flight. And I think sometimes we take on other people's stuff in order to avoid our own stuff. It's a way of kind of coping and surviving. But actually, it doesn't actually help us survive in any way because we're actually carrying more crap that doesn't belong to us. That thing of like, it's we can kind of look after other people for our mental health but end up actually plummeting our own mental health even more, if that makes sense.
I think that's a really important point you've made there, and I'm sure there are many people listening that will resonate with that. And it's around the guilt, and so many people mention that, and we'll come to that when we talk about the questions from the community. But guilt's huge, isn't it, on trying to set a boundary, feeling that it's selfish or I'm not a nice person.
Yeah.
But the flip side is high anxiety, low mood, falling out of your window of tolerance into hypervigilance or hypovigilance, your mobilised nervous system, your demobilised nervous system.
Exactly.
Bringing ourselves back into our ability to be regulated, to hold different emotions and feelings, deeply affected by boundaries. I think one of mine, I know when my boundaries have been crossed, particularly my personal boundaries, and I feel overwhelmed, but irritable, and I wouldn't say stress, but that kind of irritability. I'm a bit short with the people I love, and I don't want to be short with the people I love. And I realise it's a me issue, and I haven't had enough space. Yeah. And the moment I get space, I'm back to, I'm back.
and the funny thing is with that kind of that feeling short thing is it makes you then feel guilty. So you then do it all over again, So it becomes a bit of a cycle. And I do think that with wobbly boundaries particularly, it can often be a reenactment of maybe what was expected of us as kids. So you find a lot of like eldest daughters or like children from like immigrant families where they would kind of had to have a lot of responsibility in the family amongst their siblings, amongst their family, where they weren't able to prioritize their own boundaries. They had to look after everybody else. They will find themselves in this pattern of wobbly boundaries at work and then in their friendships and then their relationships, and it comes over and over again in all the parts of their life. So it can often be a reenactment of what happened for us as children. So that's wobbly boundaries.
Okay. Love
and
that.
then
Spiky boundaries. I love your terminology here. It's very
I love
relatable.
a metaphor.
It's great though. People remember it. You've got another brilliant metaphor I'm going to come to in a sec.
Okay. So spiky boundaries are the complete opposite. So it's when someone is more of a closed book. So they don't reveal very much of themselves. They find it very difficult to be vulnerable with others. They probably say no quite easily, as in like if there's any social plans, they're like, nope, I'm busy. Nope, I'm not available. Nope, I don't want to go. So they're kind of very reserved and more emotionally closed off from other people. And this is often kind of a way to protect themselves. Maybe they've experienced that people let them down, or they've been hurt by people in the past. So their survival technique is to just push them away. It's kind of very much like avoidant attachment.
I should say, would you mention attachment theory here?
Yeah, it's very much like that. But it can, with both wobbly and spiky boundaries, we might have them in certain areas of our life. So we might be very spiky when it comes to dating, but very wobbly when it comes to friendships.
Okay.
So it's kind of, that's kind of just what I notice. So spiky boundaries is very kind of protective of self, but it's also very lonely, very, very lonely.
We're seeing a lot more loneliness, aren't we, at the moment as well? Mm-hmm. I'm seeing a lot of it within my Instagram community. Yeah. People are talking about that a lot, that kind of avoidant. And I feel it's escalated since COVID and the pandemic.
Yeah, it's interesting. Today I did a post actually about it was kind of about healing and why do we tend to lose friends when we're on a healing journey.
I missed it. Tell me.
And it was kind of, it was a stitch of another video, but I was basically kind of saying that some people benefit from us being unhealed. So when we're people pleasers and when we are, when we have our wobbly boundaries, other people do benefit from that because we're there for them in ways that is actually not very healthy for both of us. And it can also mean that, when we're out doing all of this stuff for them, they don't have to do the work. They could actually just stay, chilled and relaxed and like living their life without actually questioning themselves and their behaviours and their needs. And so, that's why we tend to lose friends along the path of healing, because we start to realise that, I shouldn't be doing all of this stuff and I need to kind of pull back and have some boundaries. And then that's when people don't like it. And that's when maybe they'll drift off or there might be some conflict or whichever.
I'm glad you mentioned that. And I've noticed a big shift in my relationships around me since I trained as a therapist. Mm-hmm. And not always the same people stay around you, do they? And relationships really shift. Mm-hmm. Mine definitely have shifted beyond recognition, actually. And sometimes there's a sadness to that as well. Yeah, there's a loss, isn't there? Every choice we make, there's a loss the other side, isn't there? And I think that's important to bring here, is that boundaries can bring a loss as well when you make choices. But it's about making the right choices for your mental health. I want to come to people pleasing because I'm going to come to page 185 of your very good book, because this might it resonated for me. Not all of it, but lots of it did. The tendency to people please shows up as, and the list is really long, really long. The tendency to people please shows up, this really long list. Difficulty saying no, fear of what people would think of you if you ask for help, fear of disappointing others, hiding your authenticity so that you're liked. We all have this inherent need to fit in, belong. Think of Brené Brown's wonderful work. So we then lose our sense of self if we're not strong enough there to fit in. That fitting in sometimes and losing our sense of self means we have really wobbly boundaries. Yeah. Giving more than your capacity, taking on someone else's truth, using humour excessively to hide your vulnerability, overcommitting. It goes on and very much mirrored the questions I was getting from my Instagram community. Yeah. So people pleasing is huge when it comes to difficulties with boundaries. Yeah. So sorry.
Can I just also add as well that people pleasing, I think sometimes people think that it's just like something we choose to do, but it's actually a survival technique. It's part of the fight or flight trauma response. It's fight, flight, freeze and fawn.
Yes.
And fawn means that we are appeasing other people in order to survive. So we are being the funnest person in the room because that's how we survive that awkward and anxious room. We are ignoring our boundaries because otherwise it will start an argument with someone that we don't feel safe with. So it's actually a survival technique. And if we had to survive like that as a child, it's going to be our very natural way of surviving as an adult. And it doesn't mean that we should do that now because it doesn't fit anymore.
No.
But it just takes a lot of work to undo it. And that's where boundaries definitely comes in, and choosing yourself comes in.
Yes, thank you for reminding me of that. I think that was very important there, that it was initially there as a survival technique, and we carry on using it when perhaps we don't need to as such, because it's not serving us as an adult. You have this brilliant term that instead of people pleasing, you say be a people pauser. Please explain that.
Okay.
And if there's a way you can link that into your 3 wonderful healthy habits for setting boundaries.
Okay. So people pausers, it's a way of pausing your people pleasing. So one thing that often happens when we're people pleasers is that when people ask us something, we automatically say, yep, that's fine. Yeah, I can do that. I'll add that to the list. Yep, sure, no problem. We say yes so quickly because that's just our natural instinct. And a people pauser is about finding a way to pause that response. So rather than saying, yep, I'll send that email straight away, it's, oh, let me look at that. Or let me come back to you. Or I'll just check my diary and I'll let you know. And it gives you the space to go away to think about, actually, what is my actual capacity? Can I actually take on this other project, or am I already kind of up the brim with like so much stuff to do? So it gives you the chance to like pause and think about, actually, do I have space for this? And if I'm going to say no, how do I say no? How do I think about that answer? How do I think about saying no, and how do I say it to that person rather than being the fact that you have to say yes on the spot?
It was brilliant. And I think it's something a lot of people can take away from this episode. How can I be a people pauser? It's brilliant. And then you had 3 wonderful habits I know you talked a little while ago about the way to set boundaries, but you talked about listen, choose you, and say it with your chest.
Yes. So listen is, because you named actually, it wasn't resentment, you said something else. You said irritability. So anger, irritability and resentment are amazing. They're amazing for boundaries because they tell us when actually we should have set a boundary. So we'll feel angry when someone set a boundary. We'll feel resentment when we moved a boundary for someone else and then we're regretting it. So it's really important to listen to those feelings and be like, okay, what is that telling me? What boundary did I miss out on? So listen to those feelings and allow them to kind of advocate for yourself. Then the second one was choose you.
Choose you.
So a lot of the time we choose other people's needs, and we choose, we said about guilt, and it's about actually, maybe there's no other time in your life when you've actually prioritized yourself, and so it feels uncomfortable. It's like putting your shoes on the wrong foot. It's like, this doesn't feel right. I shouldn't be doing this. But actually it's about pausing and saying, actually, this time I'm going to choose myself. Because if I don't choose myself, there's going to be a lot of consequences. You're going to be burnt out. You're going to be resentful. You're going to be frustrated. So actually in this moment, I'm going to choose myself, and that's okay.
Love that.
And then the third one was, I can't remember.
It's brilliant. Say it with your chest.
Oh, yes. So that's the hard part, is that, it's not a comfortable thing. No one, people say, how do I do boundaries? It's like, it's not going to be comfortable. It's not going to be like, yeah, I'm going to go set a boundary today. It's going to be really icky, especially for the first time. So find ways to write it down first. Maybe write down what is the essence you want to say. Use a script, like I said, the be kind, be clear. I like to have like an anthem. So I usually have like a song, which is like very much like a choose me. It's like a very like confident building song.
Go on, what song is that?
It always changes.
Oh, okay.
There was one that is like, is it Sorry Not Sorry by Demi Lovato? Am I wrong? Yeah, Sorry Not Sorry by, that was like when I was in therapy, that was my boundary song of like, sorry, not sorry, but this is just me. So this is how we're going. So have that anthem and play that to yourself before you have that conversation, because it will just build up your self, a sense of self. So yeah, that's my tips.
I think people are going to love those tips. I love that. My book, Choose You, is out now, and I've devoted an entire chapter to boundaries, where I guide you through the necessity of them, why they can be so difficult to set, why some people make it harder for us to set them, and I help you find a way to develop a secure sense of self, where setting boundaries can be done with more self-belief and a little bit less guilt. Boundaries are vital for our mental health, but can be so difficult to implement. In my book, I provide a step-by-step plan to help this process become just a little bit easier with practice. Choose You, out now. Right, we are going to move on to the next section, the questions from my beautiful community.
Yes.
Which I know they will love your answers, because you're so good at this. You're like the boundary queen. Love it. What would you say to someone who was always painted as the bad person for having boundaries?
Okay.
I mean, we touched on it a little bit, didn't we? But I wonder whether just some words of beautiful Tasha wisdom.
Yeah. I think the first thing is to notice who is the one that's painting that picture for you. Because often the people that will paint that picture are the ones that don't want you to have boundaries, because they benefit from you not having boundaries. So have a look at, who are the voices that are saying that you're bad. And actually, the reality is your boundaries help you become a good person, because you're resourcing yourself. You're giving yourself capacity, you're giving yourself space, you're giving yourself all the things that make you feel safe and comfortable and good and confident. So why would you want to take that away? Why would anybody want to take you that away? And I think the idea of boundaries is that it's not about pushing people away, it's actually about strengthening relationships. When we learn how to look after each other's bubbles, we can love each other better and we can take care of each other better. So I think, maybe have a think about whether those people that paint that picture, whether they are worthy enough to be in the space that you're in, and whether they're worthy enough to be in the rest of your life. Because how long do you want to be painted as the bad person for looking after yourself?
I think that's a really beautiful answer. It's a perfect answer, actually. And it made me think about the importance of surrounding yourself with people, in addition to those, but surrounding yourself with people who respect those boundaries, who really support you and celebrate that person you're becoming in that growth. And I think that's really important as well, because they will help build resources for you subconsciously that you can then use with the other people in your life that are struggling. And that leads me on to the question that I think around guilt was probably one of the most popular questions, was ways to set boundaries with parents as an adult child. It's difficult, isn't it? And this comes up with my clients a lot in the therapy room. It's hard because some relationships are more difficult than others, particularly within the family setting. We can't just walk away. We don't want to walk away. We want to strengthen that relationship while honouring our own needs. But I just wondered whether you had any ways or tips.
I think some parents struggle with the idea of their children being adults and being like a separate, independent person with their own needs and wants, and so for that means that adult is no longer the child that you thought that they would be or you hoped that they would be. They are their own adult. And some parents really struggle with that. So I think it's about having a conversation where you're naming who you are. I am an adult and this is important to me and these are my values. This is what I need. And you have that conversation with them. It's not necessarily demanding your boundaries, but let's talk about it. Let's open it up. Now, in the best case scenario, that parent would be like, okay, I'm here to listen. Okay, cool. Let me see if I can work on that. And okay, cool. But sadly, a lot of people don't have parents like that. And that's when you have to make a decision as to whether you want to, I think first, keep trying. No boundary, not all boundaries are set within the first conversation. Sometimes it needs a lot of work. But if you find that they're constantly disrespecting your boundary or constantly not listening to it, I think you then have to decide whether you want to either cut off that relationship. That's kind of, that's what some people do.
That, we have to support
or
that,
to create space.
Yeah.
So that's where you decide, okay, how much of myself will I share with my parent and how much of myself will I not share with my parent? And how do I negotiate to make sure that my boundaries are okay whilst also still being in a relationship with them? Like, what does that look like? And you're kind of almost recontracting for yourself what that relationship looks like, because you are an adult and you shouldn't be left to feel like you are a child, because you're not. You've grown up and you know yourself. Nobody knows yourself better than yourself, and you shouldn't have to negotiate that with somebody else, even if they are your parent.
And I love the way you pulled in communication there. And it is the difficult conversation, but also it reminded me of the concept that so many people feel that the situation's going to stay stuck where it is forever. It's not. Time has this wonderful way, with the work we do and relationships and things that happen, things are fluid. Life's fluid. Something shifts. It might just settle a bit with the parent. They might reflect. They might not, but they might reflect and come back. Things ease and shift, don't they? They do have the ability to, but not in all cases. And I think that's really important to say here. For some people, it's not safe to stay in that relationship.
It's like that spiral staircase again. That parent will be on their own awareness journey, like, oh, this is about boundaries. What the hell are they talking about? Oh, wait, I think I'm getting it. Like, they'll have their own journey, so it's allowing that space. And then guilt, was that a question as well?
Just that danced the whole way through a lot of people's questions.
With guilt, I was thinking about this today, and I was thinking how if we actually look at the feeling of guilt, a lot of the time guilt is anger that's been internalized. So often we feel guilty when we're actually angry at a situation or angry at other people, but we don't feel like we can communicate it. So we then turn it inwards at ourselves. We become angry at ourselves. Why did I do this? Why did I do that? So I think it's about, especially if you're a people pleaser, by the way, because if you're a people pleaser, you don't like to express anger to people. So you just express it on yourself instead. So I think it's about unpacking, okay, I'm feeling guilty. Is there any anger in there that's supposed to go to somebody else? Is there anyone else that I'm angry at than just myself? Am I angry at the way that they responded? I'm angry at the fact that they keep asking for more and more and more of me. And to explore that, and then to think, okay, is there anything that I'm actually angry about myself at? And actually, what is so wrong about choosing myself and choosing my needs and my well-being? And actually, isn't that what I need for me to have a fulfilling life? So I think it's really unpacking the anger part of the guilt to kind of see what's been misplaced, basically.
God, I was really reflecting then when you said that, because of that inward anger. And actually only you can answer those questions, can't you, with yourself?
Yeah.
That was a great answer. Which leads me on really beautifully to, I do say beautiful a lot. I write
it's a good
beautiful.
Word.
I write beautiful a lot as well. But anyway, it leads me beautifully on to the final question, which is, what does it mean to choose you? Or what does it mean to you to choose you?
So choosing me is about when feelings come up that are uncomfortable and difficult and not very nice, rather than kind of batting them away, it's about actually inviting them in and choosing to listen to them and ask what they're trying to communicate to me. They've got a story to tell and I need to listen to it. And another part of choosing me from that is then making decisions that benefit the person that I'm becoming and the future me. Yeah, there's something about that, listening to those feelings, listening to my story, making sense of it, but also choosing different choices, even when they're uncomfortable, but knowing that they're for me and they're going to benefit me in the future.
That was just gorgeous. Tasha, you've been such a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful guest on the podcast, and it's been such a pleasure to sit and chat with you about this. I can't thank you enough for coming. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for having me.
And your book, Tasha?
Yes.
I can hold it up to the camera. Tasha does do a lot of good real talk. It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. It's available everywhere and it comes out in paperback soon, doesn't it?
In September, yes.
Yeah. So either buy this now or wait for the paperback. But really wonderful, wonderful guest. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yay.